welcome to Dream Stories. We have many guests in the studio today. Actually, we just have one guest, and it's our son, Joshua.
Hello.
And of course, we always have Michael. I never open up, so I thought, well, I'll open up this week. So
I tried to get you just to do the show with Joshua since I had to do shows without you.
I know, but you're like the staple. You're like the flower in the cake.
More people watch when
I'm just the cherry on top sometimes.
Okay, well.
I frequent here and there, so yeah.
We're glad you're here anyway.
Yeah. Me or Josh?
Both.
Okay.
Yes, we're glad both of you are here.
I'm glad to be here as well. So
I'm glad you're here. So,
Okay.
what are we going to talk about today?
I don't know. You set the show up today, so I have no idea.
Well, this should be interesting. So, today, this week we were talking to Josh, and he was reminding me of some dreams, and he told me about a dream he had this week. So I thought we would do that. We'd talk about his
that's right,
dream.
because we had talked about having him on for a dream that he had some time back.
Exactly.
And then he had another dream this week that seemed really relevant to current circumstances in life. Yeah.
And since we hadn't talked about this ahead of time, I guess we should try to think of what should we talk about to build up to get to his dream.
we can talk about
maybe
the first dream I had, and then
move
the second
on.
dream.
Yeah,
because I think they're related. I think
you believe they're connected.
I think so.
Okay.
I think
Well,
so.
and that's I mean,
First, let's talk about Joshua's journey in interpreting dreams from the time he was a child.
Yes, there's so many stories, wonderful stories.
yes.
Yeah. Well,
Moving through revelatory gifting into
Yeah.
dream interpretation.
I mean, really, we really did involve our children from early on into what we were doing. And you were a pastor, and so we did a lot of training with dreams, learning how to interpret dreams, and even learning just I say we have a knower inside of us, and it's something that I believe that we communicate with our Creator with. I call it my knower.
Does your knower know?
My knower knows things, and maybe there's a lot of people
And if
who
your
are
knower's
listening.
not knowing, you have a problem.
Possibly, yeah. I don't know what that problem exactly is. All I know is I'm connected to my Creator,
Right.
and I know things that I know. I don't know how I know, but I remember one time we would give encouraging words. Like we would just go out in the streets and just encourage people. We would go to the malls and we would just encourage people. And sometimes you would just have a knowing or something. And so one day Joshua, if I can tell this story on you,
Go ahead.
was talking to a lady, and he had been through some of the classes. He was very excited, and he's very gifted. And so he just said something like, I feel like you're like a cow.
I see you like a cow.
I see you like a cow.
Yep.
And
Which made it sound like he said she looked like a cow.
and she was robust. Is that okay to say? Or
I think that's okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
robust.
She was
She was-
not. She didn't
was-
look like a cow. That's
she
for sure.
would, what my father-in-law would say is healthy. You know, she was a healthy woman. And so, and I can say that because he referred to me as being healthy a few times. And
She would not have been, when you. Let's just being straightforward and open. It made it sound like he was saying you look like a cow. You're overweight, and she was not that overweight. She was not bigger
no, but
than
for a
you
female, you
in
could
that
just be
sense. It
just a little bit
wasn't-
overweight, and it might could
doesn't
offend
feel
you.
comfortable, right.
But
I
anyway,
understand. That's what I'm saying.
And we're talking about, you know, how do you tell someone an encouraging word when you've just said something
Well,
that could have
that's not really
possibly have offended someone? So anyway, the lady comes to you and she said, I just want to talk to you about your son. And you said, okay, great. You know, she said, well, he told me basically, when he looked at me, I reminded him of a cow. And you said you're like,
I was. Seriously
like you were going to
concerned.
apologize. She said, no. Before you say anything, I just want to tell you that he was so correct in what he was seeing about me. He was seeing that, you know, that he said that after a while, he began to interpret this metaphor.
Which is just like interpreting
A daydream almost. He began to interpret the metaphor that said something like, you process things differently than everyone else. And a cow has multiple stomachs. And it will chew on things. It will regurgitate them. Then it will swallow. And if you're not from Alabama, you may not know that a cow has 7 stomachs. But anyway, that's just something we know.
No, a cow actually does have some stomachs.
What is it? Well, it doesn't?
It's 4.
Oh, 4 stomachs.
4 stomachs.
Okay.
But it was just something that I knew from
science
class. I was always into science. I was into that thing. And so, you know, I loved science and animals, and I watched Discovery Channel all the time when I was a kid. And so it was just a way that I saw things when I saw pictures in my head. I knew how to relate them to something that God was saying. And so, it kind of goes to show, for me at least, it was things that I was interested in and I knew about, that I had knowledge of, that God allowed to speak through me.
Right. Now that you're older, would you still say it the same way?
No. Oh, no. Heavens no. I would, no.
But it was beautiful in the time you were young.
Well, at the age, I mean, like 12 years old, 10 or 12 years old.
He was about 12,
I think it was.
I think,
Yes.
yeah.
Right.
So there was so much innocence in sharing it that it actually gave it life. And that's kind of a cool thing about understanding metaphor and recognizing metaphor. And that's the idea that when you can speak through God's picture language, and metaphorical pictures we see in our mind's eye, even in the daytime. When we're talking, folks, when we talk about dreams, we don't really talk about dreams in the sense of dreams that you have at night while you're asleep. That's a dream, yes. But when we talk about dreams, we tend to be talking about them as when you see something that needs interpretation, which includes the dreams we have at night when we're asleep. And it would include something like what you just saw in your mind's eye that was speaking to you about this person.
Right.
And so when we see those metaphors, at the age you were then, it actually gave it credibility because it was a very innocent, beautiful way to express that wouldn't work at the age you are now.
Right. Because I should know better. Right.
Right.
Exactly.
And
I should at least.
But the woman,
We hope you did.
the woman came to you and said it really blessed her.
Yes.
That he said it, she said it was so innocent and so honest. It really, at first she said she was almost offended, but then she realized where he was going when he began to explain things. So I love it that we have taught our children that dreams are important and to listen to that voice inside of them when it begins to, well, you do have to be careful when you listen to a voice. But what I'm saying is our Creator.
We listen to our Creator's voice, and He speaks to us in multiple ways.
Yeah.
Dreams in the nighttime are one of the ways He speaks to us. Daydreams can still be interpreted. That's a way He speaks to us. And then just imagery and pictures that He puts in our spirit, in our consciousness, into our into our imagination even is a way that He speaks to us. And sometimes we don't think about those being ways He speaks. In the churchy circles, if I can say that without offending any of our Christian church people who are listening, in the churchy type circles, people tend to think that their Creator speaks to them by either talking out loud,
Right.
or in more, I guess, maybe mature settings, people realize, well, He doesn't always talk out loud. Sometimes our Creator puts an impression in our being, but they tend to still think that's going to be words. And so many times it's actually pictures, which is pretty amazing. So
I think thinking back on that time, I think it was really important for me growing up, knowing about these spiritual things, for that experience to have been positive for me, was not only probably was it rare, I think, where a lot of people would be offended by that and would cause problems with it, and I probably would have had a much different experience. But knowing that what I said was right and it blessed someone, and they didn't get upset about me trying,
Right.
and that they didn't get upset about the way I did it, and they were able to receive it. It was wonderful for me, because even now that I would do things differently, I would say things differently. I would be able to interpret myself before just saying what I said. I think I would have had a different experience. I would have had a different journey coming to that place of being able to interpret dreams and interpret and give, talk about that kind of spiritual thing with people.
yeah.
Much different place. I think that experience really was one of those really positive things in my life that helped me get to where I am.
Yeah, and I think what you experienced is, for me as a Christian, the New Testament has some real principles that are laid out for us that describe that journey, but we don't always recognize that's what it's saying. So for me, there's a passage in the book of Hebrews, Hebrews 5:14, and it says, "Solid food is for those who, by reason of use, have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil." And just practically speaking, what if I can put that in the French translation, since there's 3 Frenches sitting here today. If I can put that into the French translation, so to speak, it basically is saying, if you want to be mature, if you want to eat with the adults, basically, if you want to eat meat and not just always be drinking milk like a child or a baby would, if you want to eat meat, then you have to practice. And the more you practice, are you going to get it wrong sometimes? You are. Are you going to get it right sometimes? You are. But the more you practice, the more often you're going to be able to discern what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's not so good in what you hear and in what you say and how you present it. Right. And that was one of those processes for you in growing in the process of hearing and presenting, because it takes both of those.
So what we're saying is there needs to be a safe place.
Yeah.
A place for that your children or young people or people who don't understand interpreting dreams or interpreting metaphors or hearing their creator speak to them in a unique way. They need a safe place to do that. And we have to be prepared that there could be little mistakes or little bobbles along the way that we have to maybe, as those who are more mature and have been practicing longer, exercising their senses, I guess I should say, that we help them along, not be correcting in a harsh way. Which brings me to another point. It's good to be encouraging when we're interpreting.
Yeah. Why don't we keep running with this for just a little bit?
Okay.
Because we have Joshua here today, and we can always do a second episode.
True.
So why don't we keep running? Because I really think what you've raised and the topic that you've brought up for us to consider is, it's not something we've ever really talked about before on the podcast, and it affects both dream interpretation, like what we're talking about now, but it affects the gifts that we have, the gifts our Creator gives for interaction with those around us, and it affects how we approach young people growing in those things. And like you talking about encouraging, it wasn't just encouraging to the woman who heard it. It was encouraging, it was strengthening to Joshua.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Parents.
It was strengthening to us, right? And it was strengthening to the other team members.
Yeah.
Who were watching. There was a growth process that took place that wasn't just for Joshua.
Right.
And it wasn't just for the person receiving basically the dream interpretation. It was for the idea of, strengthening everybody involved.
That's good.
And I think if that's kind of the case, something that I'd like to bring up is kind of the idea of, like, we talk about in Scripture, when you look at Scripture and how God spoke in metaphor, and he spoke not only in metaphor, but in double entendres and different kinds of wordplays and puns. And I think about, that's Scripture is full of that, one story that has multiple lessons, that has multiple applications, all of that, to say, this particular story was, I feel like, a really good example of that at work, in what God does in now, and what the modern times, where it's one story. This is just my story here that I tell, but God spoke to multiple people, and there's multiple lessons to be learned from it. And just because it was something good for me, something good for my growth, I think there was other people, just like you said, who I can tell that story to people now, and other people can learn from it. But you both had, it impacted you in a completely different way.
True.
And I love that about God and how he speaks in metaphors and talking about dreams. It doesn't just come in the turn when you're sleeping and when you're, or even when you're doing other things in that kind of spiritual realm of the prophetic. It can be so much more, and it can be so much deeper, because that's who our God is, and that's how our God works. And I love that about me being able to say something that I believe to be true, and I felt God speak to me about, and received that wonderful, validation for what I was doing and how I was doing things, but also be able to use that in other ways. I just love that reflection of God in in his word, and then coming through now in the season we're in now.
Can I hang on to that? So I'm just thinking about, what if there were a negative experience? How would we have dealt with it? So there were times where I might have given someone an encouraging word, where I look at someone and I'm waiting on my Creator to give me something encouraging to say to that person. And one time I said something that probably may not have been received well, or I added to it. Like, it really wasn't everything. It wasn't like I kind of saw something or heard something in my spirit, and it just didn't seem like it would be complete. And so I felt like I needed to add something to it. Whereas if I had just left it incomplete, if I just, it wasn't incomplete, it was complete. If I had just said what I heard, but instead I felt like, oh, it's not enough, or I need to add some flavor to that, and I added something on top, and that made that flavor that I added on top was totally from me. And it made it sour. And then someone came to me and said, you know what you told them, part of it was perfect and part of it was wrong, totally wrong. And when they told me it, I was like, what I actually heard and saw in my spirit was the first thing, just the first thing. And I could have just left it at that, and I didn't. I felt like it needed some help, and I helped it, and I shouldn't have, And
that's a part of the learning curve, the growth process. And when it comes to interpreting dreams, the exact same principle applies. We interpret the dream. We don't give all our thoughts and our feelings about it. We don't add advice to it. We don't, and that's something you have to learn, because I tell people you wear more than one hat when you're interpreting dreams.
Right.
You wear the hat of the dream interpreter, and that's just the interpretation of the dream.
Right.
You have to take that hat off, and have a distinction before you share your thoughts and feelings about their dream. And sometimes you do that very overtly, and you really can tell them that's what you're doing.
Right.
Other times when you have other areas of responsibility, say in a person's life, like for 20 years, I was a pastor, but I also could interpret dreams. And so if I interpret a dream, the line might get blurred a little more when I start giving pastoral advice about what to do with that dream.
True.
But it still had to have a distinction.
Right. Yeah. Because when I saw this woman, I was kind of having a daydream when I looked at her, and I just heard the word marriage. So I just thought, oh, she must have a good marriage. So I said, you've got a good marriage. Well, that wasn't. The case. There was something really hard going on in her marriage at the time. If I had just left it at marriage, if I just heard that and just stuck with marriage and took that metaphor of marriage, I could have just said, okay, I'm just hearing the word marriage. She might then would have opened up and said, I need prayer for my marriage, or something like that. And that's why I could have stopped it. I kind of interfered with the flow possibly. And we have to be so aware of that. We have to be in tune to that. And you may not understand that right now. If you're listening to this podcast and you have no clue what we're talking about, you can reach out to us. We can kind of, fill in more gaps. But because we're talking about 25 years of us learning and understanding, right?
Well, and you're talking about something I think is interesting when we go back to Joshua's metaphor, the picture of the cow. If you had left that just as a see you like a cow, it would have been very damaging.
Yeah.
It had to have more.
Right.
But there are other times when you have to just leave with what you see, and knowing how to balance those is very significant. Because I remember the time that you had someone come up to you in a group or a line. I don't know if Joshua may remember this, and you were sharing, and you saw something for them, and you didn't know anything else to do except just say what you saw, which was
a crazy
pound cake.
Oh gosh, are we gonna go there?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the person, is weeping over what you said, because they had been complaining about their life, that they didn't have value or worth, that all they did was bake pound cakes for people. That wasn't really valuable. Their husband did lots of stuff.
Right.
But they just baked pound cakes when people came into town. And what you basically said by just giving what you saw was, you have value.
Yeah, they baked pound cakes. It was kind of like their ministry. They gave them to people to show them that she gave them to people to show them that she loved them. But then she began to beat herself up saying it's unimportant. I didn't know all that.
Right.
I just heard in my spirit, say the word pound cake to her,
Well,
and it was weird. I didn't want to. It sounded so crazy.
You went through a process of evaluating how and what you were going to say. But there is something to be said for coming back to where you were, Joshua, at 12, which is you just did it.
Yeah.
I mean, did you evaluate? I mean, how did that happen for you?
I don't know. I think it comes a little bit of, maybe some of it was, I don't want to say luck, but some of it was just the way it happened. Mm-hmm. It happened that way, and it turned
right
out really
place
good.
at the right time.
Right place, right time. I was in the right frame of mind, and it just happened. But there's also, I could see it being. You talked about your knower earlier. A lot of times I can say something, and a lot of times I do, and I think this may call back all the way to that experience. I don't know, but I can just say a word or a phrase or say what I see, and when the moment I say it out loud, I know if I need to say any more or not. Mm-hmm. And it's I think it has to do with the first step of just taking the step of saying something, and I think that's really a big part of how I minister to people now. Is a lot of times I'll just say what I see, and I'll know if I need to say any more after I've said it. Yep. And I think it has to do with their response. I think it has to do with the discernment, the knower inside of me that I know at that point I need to say more or things like that. There's things like that, but there's things where I've had trouble too in that same regard of I feel like I need to say more. Like
you're talking about something that for the process of growth and maturity, when we look at it from the dream, because even though we started to talk about more things than just dream interpretation, this is really one of those places we're talking about revelation. That is hearing our Creator's voice in various ways. One of the ways He speaks is metaphors, pictures. When we bring it back to dream interpretation and we look at this from the avenue of strictly dream interpretation, then we've got a great illustration this time in the Old Testament that points us as Christians to the idea that there is a balance between learning and knowing. Yeah. Learning, and what we would call it would be the difference between training and gifting. And in dream interpretation, we really do balance between those two things. It's taken from Daniel chapter 2, where Daniel has a gift. He's just capable of interpreting dreams. I mean, that's just who he is. And yet, at the same time, he's not completely competent, completely capable. And so in his case, his Creator sends an angelic being, a spiritual being, to him to teach him some things about dreams on a particular dream and on some particular things. And so he gets trained by a third party, so to speak. Happened to be an angel for him, but still it's another.
And you said Daniel,
being.
Right?
Did I say Daniel? Yeah.
Okay.
It's Daniel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just making sure.
You were confused.
Well, sometimes I drift off, and I'm just thinking he did say Daniel, right?
Daniel?
Well, I was going to comment on that. There was also a time where he went and got some other people and said, "Me and my friends will find out what this means."
Yes, exactly.
Right? That's why I wanted to make sure we were on the right person.
And both of those are part of that process we're talking about growth. Growth in hearing our Creator in general. Yeah. Growth in dream interpretation, training, gifting, and growth in maturing in how it's presented. And I think that's a beautiful picture for Christians, even for non-Christians, for in the Judeo-Christian tradition, it's a beautiful picture of how our Creator cares about taking what comes natural, because that really, your gifting for Joshua really came somewhat naturally, but it was in a process of training. Right. That it's enhanced.
Yeah. Which brings me to another point is that we have 4 sons, and I think they all dream, and they all dream different things, and they don't all use their whatever God has called them to do the same thing the same way. They're all different. So us saying this, for those who are listening who may have children and you're like, oh, I wish my son would do that, or my daughter would do that, or my husband would do that, there's a process and there's a journey for everyone. Right. And you definitely don't want to push someone in a way that they don't they're not feeling led or something like that. And I think that's always important too, to just embrace people and love people where they are on their journey.
Well, that's another good question, I think, for Joshua. And I don't even know if I know the answer to this.
I'm afraid.
I know. But
He's been so honest lately, it hurts.
I'm thinking about this idea of
I love you.
Treating the people around us, not just necessarily family and children, but treating the people around us differently, because we treat them not differently because it's an intention to be different with them, but responding to them in the way that they best receive. In that
and
sense.
Joshua felt very comfortable. I don't know, Joshua, did you ever feel forced or pushed when we were? I thought that's where you were going.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
No,
did I take it out of your mouth?
That's all right.
I never felt forced. I don't think I felt forced or pushed. I think at times maybe I felt like there was some kind of responsibility, right? Like that's definitely probably more of a word I would use. I come at this. I think at this point I've come to a kind of an understanding about what that was. I think a lot about because I have kids now. I think a lot about how I'm going to train my kids and teach my kids this whole thing of spirituality, Christianity, dreams.
Right.
Understanding how God speaks to us.
But it won't be the same way.
It won't be the same way. But at the same time, I think I felt, because both of you were involved and Granddaddy was so involved with ministry and with this kind of thing, I felt some responsibility at times to do it, to be able to do it.
Right.
And there were times where it definitely made me feel lesser or discouraged because I felt like I couldn't.
Or maybe you didn't have a choice.
Maybe not.
Okay.
Not necessarily that I didn't have a choice. If I did feel that way, it was self-inflicted. It wasn't that I felt like other people were telling me, right? But I think at the same time, raising my kids, I think I understand now, looking back to it, I see that as a positive thing. Because what I see is, thanks.
No, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. What I see is like this journey that I had of I didn't feel responsible to that because it was forced upon me. I felt responsible to that because I felt like I was supposed to carry it. I was supposed to carry it on. I think especially now in modern times, we've had this loss of understanding of a family and a lineage and a legacy. And I think looking back at the things that I have experienced, many people would say, especially people my age and younger, would say that you don't need to have anything to do with your family. You can just cut off ties. You can do your own thing. You can be your own person. You don't have, who cares what your parents did or what their grandparents did, that you can do your own thing. And just to an extent, that's true. But there's always a piece of, I think, and I believe, for most people, there is a piece of you that's wrapped up in your history and your lineage and your legacy, to be able to go back and say, I have some responsibility to this. Whether it's small, whether it's just remembering it even, I have some responsibility to this. And I think at the time when I was going through all this, I wouldn't have understood that. But looking back, I'm thankful for it because I think it was wonderful that you two didn't force me into it, because I probably wouldn't have gotten here if that was the case. If you had forced me into that and pushed me into that, said you have this responsibility, I would not be here. I would not be in that place.
Receiving the responsibility on your own made it more palatable.
Exactly.
In that sense.
And not only palatable, but more. I was able to do it.
Yeah.
It was no longer a burden. It was a goal.
Yeah.
But that's what I think I was saying. It was a choice. You didn't feel it didn't feel forced. It was something that you could choose.
Well, I love it because it's like that concept of you know. I mean, I was just thinking about the metaphor for it. If it were a dream, you're a different flavor of ice cream than your mom and I.
Yeah.
You're still ice cream.
Right.
And you can put your own toppings. You know, you may like sprinkles and I may like hot fudge. So, that's the way it goes. I love that. I'm glad we took the time for this. We're out of time for today. And I think we could have cut both topics short if we hadn't have completed this.
Right,
so
right.
let me just say before we have to go today, we're going to hold Joshua over in the studio and go ahead and record next week's episode as well to cover the things we started talking about that we would go. But just remind you out there, we appreciate you. If you are enjoying the podcast, like, share, subscribe. We're on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and multiple platforms now, as well as our audio podcast. So interact with us there, and we'll be very grateful. Until next time, keep dreaming.